Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Live from the State Capitol webinar. We'll give everyone a minute or so to join us, and then we'll begin today's presentation. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Live from the State Capitol webinar with Melanie Willoughby, Chief Government Affairs Officer, and Sarah Bloom, Vice President, Environment and Energy. Today, Melanie and Sarah will discuss the major issues they're now working on over at the State House as we enter the height of budget season. Melanie will discuss how the budget's taking shape from the last year of the business tax reduction phase-in to reform of the BEAT program. She'll also discuss what has become an annual ritual of the legislature proposing and passing a millionaire's tax and an increase in the corporate business tax. Sarah will talk about the hot issues in energy and the environment, including the implementation of the open space referendum. A few housekeeping matters before we begin. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you automatically in the next day or so. It will also be archived and available from the homepage of our website. Also, we will be emailing you the slides for today's presentation, so be on the lookout for those. Lastly, after Melanie and Sarah complete their presentations, they will be taking all of your questions. So now, let's get things started with Melanie Willoughby. Melanie?
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, everyone. I'm really looking forward to a great dialogue with you and answering your questions. So I'd really like to start, first of all, with an overview of the Government Affairs Department of Njbia. With New Jersey having an extremely active legislature, we have 6 advocates for business who are on our team, and they are the experts in their fields. They're experts in tax and economic development, workers' compensation, employment and labor policy, workforce development, energy and the environment, and Sarah Bloom, our advocate for energy and the environment, I am happy to say is here with us today, and you know you'll be hearing more from her later. It is our job here at Njbia to be in constant contact with the legislators and their staff, plus the administration, the state departments, and the agencies, and we monitor all of the legislative and regulatory activity that happens in Trenton. Now, the New Jersey legislature is actually considered to be part-time, but they meet every Monday and Thursday throughout the year, and they do give us a little break, usually in July and August. So they can really get into a lot of mischief during that period of time. Remember, there are advocates here in Trenton for every conceivable interest group, from the Mothers Against Drunk Driving to the AARP, to the labor unions, to the teachers, to all of the possible professional societies representing every profession. Some I've never even heard of. So, if you need someone to represent you in Trenton when you're a business, it's Njbia. And we represent every size business, from the sole proprietor to the large corporation, and in every possible industry. Now, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the number of bills we have to deal with, we track over 3,000 bills per year, everything from mandated paid sick leave to the proposed millionaire's tax to 80% renewables. Actually, environmental legislation represents the largest single issue area, thank goodness for Sarah, with over 300 bills that she tracks. We also track bills in healthcare, human resources, energy, tax, and economic development, and they all have a very large number of bills that we have to stay on top of. Now let me turn to some of the big legislative issues facing you today. Now, the biggest issue for our members, and they have told us this, is defeating the mandatory paid sick leave bill. Under the proposed state legislation, employers would have to provide 5 or 9 days of paid protected leave every year, depending on their employee size. Many employers who already offer paid sick time off think that they actually won't be affected. But that is not the case, and let me tell you why. First, there's the carryover payout. And what does that mean? Well, employees could carry over unused sick leave from one year to the next. Now, I know a lot of businesses out there don't have that policy. It would be 40 hours for small companies less than 10 employees and 72 hours for larger companies of 10 employees and above. The only alternative for you to the carryover would be to pay the time out each year to your employees. Then there's record keeping. Employers would be required to keep confidential records of any leave time used by every employee for 5 years. Information on the health of an employee or their family member would need to be treated as confidential and not disclosed even to the supervisor without the employee's written permission. And then there's the notice requirement. Employers would be required to provide written notice on the availability of leave 30 days after a notification poster is issued, at the time of hiring, and at any time requested by the employee. I'm not done. Documentation costs. Although employers could ask for documentation on the need for leave, they'd also have to pay for any costs obtaining it. Liability issues. An employer could be sued if they disciplined an employee for using paid sick leave, took an adverse action against them, or gave them an unfavorable assignment. So now let's just imagine, if you move an employee off a project because they haven't been in the office, now I know I have had to do this myself, would this constitute adverse action? Most likely. And couldn't any reassignment be unfavorable if an employee doesn't like it? And then there's finding replacements. It would be illegal for an employer to require an employee to find his replacement, even if the employee knew in advance that they'd be taking leave. Now, you know, when you're working in a restaurant, for instance, and you're needing time off, that you find a replacement, one of your colleagues who you ask if you can fill in. That would no longer be possible. And finally, no PTO substitution. So you have employers who are very generous, and they actually offer PTO, which is called paid time off. And you'd still have to provide the additional number of sick days to comply with the legislation. So that's, if you have PTO policy, now you still have to provide the sick days. And that's because the legislation prohibits you from reducing existing benefits which are more favorable to your employees. It's unbelievable the amount of requirements and administrative mandates that are in this legislation. And we have 70% of our member companies who have told us they already provide paid sick leave, but they'd still be impacted with all these administrative mandates. So the Assembly Speaker had said that the bill would be passed by his House in the beginning of 2015. And now it still hasn't. The bill is only out of committee in the Assembly, and we don't have any indication for timing of its passage right now. The governor does indicate that he will veto this bill if it comes to his desk, but we are not taking this for granted. That's why NJBIA is leading a coalition of business organizations and companies who are opposed to the legislation. We must be ever vigilant in opposing this bill. I would urge you to visit our new website at keepnjcompetitive.org for additional information. That's keepnjcompetitive.org, where you can get a lot more information on paid sick leave. Let me now turn to the introduction of the Christie budget, which was done on February 24th of this year to the tune of $33.8 billion. We are supportive of the governor's proposed budget, including his pledge for no new tax increases. That's always music to our ears, because as you know, New Jersey is a very heavily taxed state. The budget contains a number of positive items for all of you, including the completion of a $2.3 billion phase-in of business tax reductions and reforms, and those were originally initiated in 2012. I know we all thought this day would never come, that they would be completely phased in, but they are. These bipartisan reforms actually include cutting the filing fee for S Corps by 25%, which is a great opportunity for small business. It eliminated the energy tax known as TIFA, which you know was a big reform for the cost of energies, like for our manufacturers. It allows smaller companies to offset losses with gains under the gross income tax. It also provides for increased research and development tax credits, which is really helpful for our angel investors. And we move to a single sales factor. The governor's budget also strives to address the structural deficit in the state's pension system, and that means that he will be placing some dollars in there in order to be able to pay the pension requirements. But he is not able to make the full payment, but if he did, we wouldn't be able to address so many of the other programs and policies that are so important for running our government every day. We are also supportive of his proposals to provide greater flexibility for businesses under the Business Employment Incentive Program, which you might all know as BEEP. This will allow businesses to accept their benefit as a refundable tax credit instead of a grant. Last year, the grant proposals were not included in the budget. So this year, there is an attempt to try to alleviate this situation with businesses and to provide their benefit as a refundable tax credit. So the BEEP, as you might know, was successful in creating over 110,000 jobs. And this solution will allow the state to meet its obligation and ensure that the companies who already met their job creation requirements receive the funding they were promised. We have formed a coalition of our member companies who are impacted by this action to ensure that the final resolution is favorable to them. If you are interested in joining the coalition because you too have a BEEP grant and you would like to be part of the solution, please give me a call at 609-393-7707. And lastly, there were no new taxes included in the proposed fiscal year 2016 state budget. But Senate President has already introduced legislation for a millionaire's tax to fund the public employee pension payments. Now, the governor, as you know, committed a portion of the budget to making the required pension payments, but he could not make the full payment. We have other requirements. So what has Senate President decided to do? Well, he'll try to make that up through a millionaire's tax. The governor has said the proposal is dead on arrival. He's already vetoed it 4 times before, so we're hopeful that 5th time is the charm. Then there is the issue of the funding of the Transportation Trust Fund. The governor did not mention any new funding source in his budget message. Instead, he cobbled together a combination of bonds, loan repayments, and cash infusion from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to actually keep the $1.6 billion capital program solvent through June of 2016. Now, you might remember that there was a lot of effort on the part of the administration together with the legislature to try to find a new revenue source, but that effort has stalled at this time, and we believe that with the election for the Assembly upon us, that there just might not be a vote for a gas tax right now, but stay tuned to November after the election. And finally, I'd like to address a bill that's hot off the presses, which was just introduced last Thursday, and it's out-of-network legislation. So what does that mean exactly? Well, you might think about your insurance card, and when you look at it, you see that you have in-network charges and what you have to pay in your copay and your co-insurance, and then what would be for out-of-network. What this bill attempts to do is address the inequities of what happens when you are paying in-network charges that are negotiated by your insurance carrier versus out-of-network charges which are not negotiated by your insurance carrier and can really cost the employer and the employee, depending on your insurance product, a lot of money. Every year, thousands of New Jerseyans do find themselves presented with really a surprise medical bill from a doctor. Think like an anesthesiologist or radiologist who actually becomes very involved in your care, but you've gone to an in-network hospital, but unbeknownst to you, the ologists as we like to fondly call them, are not covered by your insurance. In another case, you may have sought services from a hospital emergency department that was not an in-network. These problems that develop are actually having a real significant impact on the affordability of healthcare coverage in New Jersey. And we have some of the highest healthcare costs in the nation. Yet in a survey done by Njbia of our members, our employers have said that even though they are struggling to meet their requirements for paying for their employees' health insurance, that they still need relief. So we believe that transparency in this process and a fair resolution for how you dispute the charges that are out of network needs to be addressed in legislative reform. And those are some of the things that are being addressed in the bill that was introduced on Thursday. But always the devil is in the details, as you know. We think that the consumers have a right to information about the cost of healthcare services, along with information about whether this provider is in network or out of network. Presently, New Jersey law does protect consumers who buy fully insured health plans, so that if you follow the rules, by using in-network hospitals, you will not be hit with unexpected healthcare charges from the out-of-network provider because it's picked up by your health insurance company. You would just pay the in-network copay. Now, the same is true for emergency room visits. However, this protection does come at a cost to the purchaser, which would be the employer, in the form of higher health insurance premiums. Now, the bill is ultimately paid by the health insurance carrier, but often the amount that is billed in charges, actually, which is the highest rate providers charge, has to be picked up by the health insurance carrier and then would get ultimately passed on to the employer in higher health insurance premiums. We think this issue has to be addressed. We applaud the legislators for taking a stab at trying to address it, but you know, as I said before, the devil's always in the details, and so we are closely examining the bill and working with stakeholders on the details. And I certainly welcome any input from folks today in what their thoughts are on this very large issue in helping to address healthcare costs. So I'd like to pause here and introduce Sarah Bloom to take us through a number of the critical issues in the energy and environmental arena. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Melanie. And since we were just talking about healthcare, I can say from the environment side, the pollen count should be going down soon. So for those of you suffering from allergies, my work on the Clean Air Council tells me that while we are having a superstorm of pollen, you should see some relief soon. And since all politics does seem to be local, I think that one of the biggest issues this year within the environment front has been the fight over open space. And you might recall on the ballot last November, there was a question dealing with open space. Since 1961, voters have been asked various questions on how we fund open space in New Jersey. There's been 10 separate bonds, a rededication of the sales tax from 1999 to 2009, and there was the creation of the Garden State Preservation Trust Act. However, when the money ran out, environmentalists sought a way to come up with another mechanism to fund open space last year. They didn't want a new tax because they knew that wouldn't go anywhere in the State House. Bonds weren't a viable option, so they looked to existing revenue. And part of the problem was that traditionally there have been about $400 million a year available, and that they needed at least $200 million to keep status quo. But the closest they could come up with was the corporation business tax revenue that was dedicated to the Department of Environmental Protection. And depending on how good of a year it was, brought in between $100 and $150 million. So the result from the ballot question was the rededication of 4% of the CBT taxes currently dedicated to other environmental programs, and in 2009 increased that to 6%, taking an additional 2% out of the general fund. Now, NJBIA have been opposed to the ballot question for several reasons. First, the state's already having budget problems, and that's not going to be helped by taking away revenue from existing programs. Now, these programs could be cut, or money could be taken from other programs to try to help and fill those gaps. Second, the programs that were currently funded were helping with our air quality, water monitoring, cleaning up contaminated sites. We can't sacrifice one area of the environment for another. And third, and perhaps most importantly, is that there's no end point. And in previous years, we've always known how long we're dedicating money for, how long we're bonding for. And now there is no end point, so forever and ever. And we don't know what our open space needs are going to be in the future. But alas, the voters approved the measure. Now the next problem came into play. When they passed the legislation, they didn't say how the money should be spent. So now for the past several months, they've been trying to craft enabling legislation. There's been a big fight within the environmentalist community. Do we fund state parks or private nonprofits? Do we preserve farmland or buy space in urban areas? Do we preserve historic buildings or do we buy blue acres? And what do we do about those existing DEP programs we aren't funding anymore at the same levels? Governor Christie put forth his budget, and within it, the administration's vision for how to spend the money. $80 million for open space is available. So, divide it up. 42%, or $33.9 million goes to state parks and their management. And the remaining 58%, about $46 million, to green acres, farmland preservation, and historic preservation, dividing them up about 60%, 36%, 3%. And in the past, nonprofit organizations received 10% of the money, so you can see why they're fighting for it. As the budget gets tighter, and I believe OLS just said this morning that they're expecting corporation business tax revenues to go down next year, it's going to be more of a battle to protect our economy and our environment. NJBIA has been involved in these types of battles, though, and we're in good shape to watch out for business. Another example of our fighting for business in the budget process deals with energy costs. How many of you read your utility bills beyond how much you owe? I'd wager probably not too many of you. Well, within your bill, there is a myriad of charges and fees. And if you look at the breakdown, the majority of your bill goes to the actual commodity, which is electricity. But the surprising thing is, the next biggest portion of your bill is government-imposed taxes and fees. Now, a few years ago, this was 27%, almost a third of the bill. Well, NJBIA has been fighting to lower these charges, and we succeeded in recent budgets to eliminate the TIFA surcharge, which Melanie mentioned earlier, and that lowered this portion of the bill down to 24%. And we're continuing to fight to reduce those charges even lower so that we can compete better with our neighboring states. But with Superstorm Sandy, there's been a lot of investment in infrastructure, which is being offset by the reductions we've achieved. So most likely, you're not going to see an impact in your bill. But part of the reason why is because we were able to fight for the TIFA surcharge to be eliminated. Now, another area that impacts things is renewable energy. NJBIA is supportive of a diverse portfolio, but you also have to think about the reliability. Business needs baseload power. That's power that can run 24/7. Right now, renewables are more costly than what's considered baseload supply, our nuclear power plants, natural gas plants, coal plants, and part of that is in part due to reliability. When you turn on a light switch, 9 in 10 times nuclear power will be on, versus solar, which is 1 in 10 times, when you look at it from a reliability side. Another part of it goes back to those government-imposed taxes and fees. New Jersey has a renewable portfolio standard that aims to have over 20% of our power come from renewables by 2020. Now that includes all kinds of renewables, solar, wind, biomass, hydro, etc. Senator Smith, the chair of the Senate Energy and Environment Committee, convened several work groups last year to start to examine the role of renewables and what we should be doing in our state to plan for the future. This work laid the groundwork for future legislation, and we've seen recently in committee a bill which would mandate 80% of our generation come from renewables. Now this would be a mix again from solar and wind and other things, but NJBIA have been opposed to the bill. And again, looking at it from lowering the cost of doing business in New Jersey, there was a couple of problems with the legislation. One, we don't currently have storage capabilities at the moment. So if you try to think about it from the standpoint of these renewables don't always run. For example, solar power can't run at night. So right there you've cut its reliability in half by about 50%. Yet we still need power at night. And if you can't store it, then how do you use it? It's kind of like having a toy that needs batteries and you don't have any. Secondly, estimates by the ratepayer advocate were that the bill would cost about $3 billion to implement. So you can imagine how that could impact your electric bills. And third, again, we need a diverse portfolio. And if we're having 80% coming from renewables, that's not necessarily hedging our bets or using our existing infrastructure. Now, another area that's seen some legislation recently has been offshore wind. And while it's still being developed offshore and no state has successfully done this yet, there's several things that NJBIA have been looking for in terms of protecting ratepayers, because business is the largest ratepayer and we consume 64% of the electricity. So many of these state policies directly impact the cost of doing business here. And when we discuss having incentives for renewables, a lot of times that impacts the business bill more so than the residential bill, due to the fact that we use more power. So when looking at developing an offshore model, one of the things that we had fought for was making sure that there was a net benefit test so that ratepayers were seeing some type of benefit for the money that they were investing into these systems. And the BPU is still evaluating what should be done offshore. There's been different proposals. Additionally, the federal government is going through its leasing program. So this isn't something yet that's going to be impacting ratepayers, but it's still being discussed within the policy realm. So that's something else that we're working on. And this is just an example of some of the many issues and regulations within energy and environment. And I encourage you to join our environment and energy issue networks to get the latest news first. And Melanie's going to let you know more about that later. And I look forward to some discussion on this too. Back to you, Melanie.
Thank you so very, very much, Sarah. I'd now like to turn to the fact that NJBIA not only fights legislation and supports legislation that's already been introduced by legislators, because you know that they have so many wonderful ideas that they rush to put into legislation, which we must react to. But we also like to sit back and contemplate how we can move the economy forward in some very proactive ways. So one of the things that NJBIA did some research on is the whole estate and inheritance tax issue in the state of New Jersey. It's one of the areas that New Jersey is an outlier. But overall, on tax policy, New Jersey is an outlier. And we've been trying to reform a lot of these, and that big reform that was just done over the past 5 years that is finally phased in is one of the areas where we were trying to eliminate a lot of those tax policies where it actually brings us into being competitive with our neighboring states. Now here's another one, the estate and inheritance tax. So New Jersey is one of 14 states with an estate tax, and we are one of 7 states with an inheritance tax. But we are only one of 2 states that have both an inheritance tax and an estate tax, and that really makes us an outlier in death taxes, that is. All the details of this egregious situation are captured in the research by our Public Policy Foundation, New Jersey Pro, and you can get a copy of our study, which if you visit our website, which is right up there on the screen. Now this study shows that many businesses will move to other states that have neither tax when it comes to transfer their business. The study showed that these taxes were a significant cause of wealth leaving the state, costing New Jersey billions of dollars. It is time to reform to prevent this exodus of our residents and small businesses to other states before they die. Now, we want our citizens to decide to die here so that they can continue their businesses and pass them on from generation to generation. We think this will help spur economic growth in a state that's actually very heavily dependent upon our small businesses. According to a 2010 report by Boston College, between 2004 and 2008, the state lost 302,779 households. During the same period, our inflow of wealth dropped by $183 billion and declined in net wealth by $168 billion. Another study, which was issued in 2014 by Region Atlantic, reported that 87,630 2010 federal tax returns were filed in states other than New Jersey by people who filed their 2009 tax returns in New Jersey. These 87,630 tax returns accounted for a loss of, wait for it folks, $5.5 billion in taxable income for New Jersey. Think of what programs we could pay for. Both the Boston College and Region Atlantic studies found that over half of the residents cited moving to other states without either an inheritance or an estate tax as a factor. Of the 87,630 New Jersey residents who filed in other states, 41% moved to, I want you all to guess, okay, yes, Florida. That's the state where 41% moved to. So, you're all right. With the looming public pension payments that have to be made, funding for Transportation Trust Fund, and the overall budget constraints, the death tax reform is actually on the back burner. But we will not rest. This is our top business priority, and we are going to continue to make it our top business priority because it's too much of an economic detriment to us not to have it reformed. I'd now like to talk to you a little bit about how you can get involved in NJBIA, because we believe that the more members who are involved in our public policy issues, the more successful we are. Because believe it or not, legislators actually like to hear from the companies directly about the issues that are impacting you and how they impact you. Because when they hear it from you directly and you're a constituent, it makes a big deal to them. So we have a lot of opportunities for you to participate. First, there are our ELC meetings, and that stands for Employer Legislative Committees, and they happen in almost every county every month, and those are usually breakfast, sometimes lunch, nominal fee to pay for hearing legislators talk, and they're intimate settings. It can be anywhere from 16 to 100 people who are in the room talking public policy. Also, our issue networks. These are issue networks related to the issues of tax, economic development, healthcare, environment, and we send them to you as the issues come up. We quickly get them done and out to you. And you have to sign up for them because they're opt-in. Then there's the policy committees. We have them in all the issue areas that we cover, and they meet on a quarterly basis. They're run by the lobbyists in those issue areas, and we bring in administrative officials, agency members, we bring in legislators, we bring in businesses to talk about the issues of the day, and it's really great networking opportunities. Now, also, I don't want you to forget that you can download our Legislative Directory app on your iPhone, your iPads, and on Android devices. Just go to the Apple Store, and you can download it for iPhone and iPad. And then if you have an Android device, I'm not sure where you go, but because I don't have one of those, but I'm sure you all do. Now, you can also subscribe to New Jersey Business Today, which is our new email news service, which comes out daily. And it comes out at 4 o'clock, and you get all the latest business news that's fit to print from NJBIA. And don't forget that you can get this and subscribe to it on the homepage of New Jersey Business Magazine. And lastly, I hope you're following our Twitter account, because you can sign up at get to us at NJ Business, and I hope you follow us. I have tasked all of our lobbyists on the team to get us over 3,000 followers, and so I'm very hopeful that as a result of this webinar, we'll be over 3,000 followers today. So thank you all very, very much, and I really look forward to your questions, and I know Sarah does too, and I'm going to throw it back to Peter.
Thanks, Melanie. There's a lot of material there to talk about, and we would like to remind you, those who are on with us, please forward your questions. There is a field in which you can type them, and we will ask them to Melanie and Sarah immediately upon receiving them. The first thing I'd like to ask is going back to the millionaire's tax and the corporate business tax increase. First of all, the millionaire's tax functions as essentially an income tax increase on small business. So although the popular selling of this is typically that it impacts only, quote, millionaires, it also does impact our members who pay their taxes through their personal returns. So first thing is, if you could talk a little bit about that and the impact on small business, and also going to something you said before, this is the fourth time through this has passed, so the legislature is likely to pass this and the governor is likely to veto it. So what, you don't want to say what's the ultimate point, but why go through this process again to achieve the same result we've achieved for the last 4 years?
Peter, thanks for that question. I have to say that politics plays a very big role in the legislation that's introduced and acted on. And when you have a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, you're always going to have a difference of opinion on the direction that the two parties are going to want to go. And so that has been very prevalent throughout the administration of Governor Chris Christie, because he's always had a Democratic legislature. And so the way you develop tax policy is going to be different depending on what party you are in. So the Democrats believe that taxing millionaires is the way to resolve our funding issues. Governor Christie believes that it is not the way to get us out of this problem, but that you need reform of the pension system and reform of the health care policies for the state and local employees. So we believe that there is reform that's necessary, because we know that in the business world that the businesses have had to make tough decisions about whether they have pension systems that are defined benefit or defined contribution, and are we going to continue with Cadillac healthcare plans because we cannot afford them. And so businesses have had to make those tough decisions, and in providing services and benefits to their employees that are what can be afforded, and still continue to provide them. And we believe that the state government needs to get with the program and do the same thing.
Sarah, just back on the energy issue for a second. You talked a lot about how the things you're working on impact our businesses and our members, but how do you sort of go from explaining that as a statewide issue to explaining it as something that can individually impact our businesses? In other words, this is probably something that a lot of people don't think about on a daily basis. So what would you say to them to say, hey, there's a lot going on, and you did a little of it, but this is something you really need to be paying attention to, because there are options to saving money. There are a lot of things happening, and there may be better ways to do more effectively and efficiently what you're doing now in a more expensive manner.
Sure, Peter. Well, New Jersey has some of the highest energy rates, and I think that while we've seen natural gas helping lower some of our energy rates, our businesses are still coping with that. But for a lot of smaller companies, the bill usually just goes to your accounting department and gets paid. But it gets factored in, and I think after labor and healthcare costs, energy is usually about the third item that we hear from business as being one of their biggest costs. And so in helping to mitigate it, one of those charges that are built into your hidden fees from the government is a societal benefits charge. And that's another area that we're working to lower it. But what that charge does is it funds something called the Clean Energy Program. And the state runs this program where you can get grants and rebates for doing energy efficiency and conservation measures. And so a lot of times companies don't know about this. So if you need to buy a new refrigerator for your office, or if you need to do something as simple as change out some of your light bulbs, a lot of times you can see big savings and energy reductions there, but you may not even know about the rebates. And so that's one area that we encourage our members to look at if they're planning on doing something to their facility, because it can help save you energy costs. Another thing too is shopping for your electricity. And this has been around for a couple of years, but not something that folks are necessarily comfortable with. And I like to think of it kind of the model of like UPS, where if you think about electricity that way, we have transmission lines and the power gets delivered to you, similar to a package. UPS doesn't own the package, they just deliver it. So your traditional utility owns the lines that the power gets delivered to you in, but they don't necessarily own the electricity anymore. They'll go out and buy it for you and deliver it to you. But businesses also have the opportunity to go out and buy it themselves. And if you're not comfortable with this, NJBIA actually also has a program there too, where we've negotiated a contract with Constellation Energy, and we can look at helping you manage your costs for electricity as well. So those are a couple different areas that people may not necessarily think about because you're busy running your business on a daily basis. And that's part of the reason why I'm here too, so that I can fight for you and you don't have to worry about these headaches.
Okay, we have a question from Jimmy, and this would be for Melanie. Who Jimmy wants to know is on paid sick leave. He wants to know if an employee can use, quote, sick leave as personal leave, or it must be named as sick leave only.
They can use sick leave for their sick children and family members. But in terms of personal leave, if you're thinking about this as, you know, I need to handle a traffic violation, for instance, it would not be related to that. It would be related to being ill for yourself or a family member.
Melanie, back on the estate and inheritance tax, we had a recent poll that showed that 90% of our members were considering moving out of state because of the estate and inheritance tax. Obviously, if that happened, that would not be good news for us if 90% of our members are bolting to someplace else. But nevertheless, everyone agrees, Democrats, Republicans, we've all heard it, everyone agrees that this is a major issue, this is making us not competitive, people are leaving the state because of this, and it's really not part of the budget process. So if you look into your crystal ball, look forward, and how do you see this moving forward? Because once the budget's gone, budget process is over, the impetus to be doing something is not as great. So how do you see that issue in particular unfolding? Because this is going to be a big one for us.
Actually, the issues that are big dollar amounts need to be structured in a way that, almost like a campaign, where you help to get legislators on board, understanding the reasons why this is important to the economic well-being, and you need to be able to help make sure that when it comes time to prioritize in budgets in the future, that you're on everyone's agenda as the first item that they want to address. And there are conflicting and competing priorities for the budget. And so you're up against a lot of other interest groups that are all going to compete for the same amount of money. And if we want to make this the top priority issue, we have to really be able to make the convincing arguments about why it is so important to the economic well-being of this state, and not just for businesses, but we're talking about, you know, individuals who are retiring and who have created their wealth in this state and then take the wealth to Florida with them and are spending in Florida, and they take their philanthropy with them. So it's impacting our culture, it's impacting art, it's impacting investments in so many of our charities, because when you have the wealth leave, the people who invest in those social service programs and depend on those benefits from those contributors, that goes too. So this is a much bigger issue for our economy overall, and we are going to make that a priority and help to have the legislators convinced that it's the top priority for budgets in the future.
Why do you think those arguments have not resonated up until now? Again, everyone seems to agree, both parties, but still we're sort of not moving forward on the issue.
It's a budgetary constraint. We've got a huge issue related to pension reform and to the health care benefits of state workers. We've got a crumbling transportation infrastructure in which is running out of cash to be able to pay for fixing our roads. We have schools that we have Supreme Court requirements on how we fund them. We have a lot of mandates that already are in place that take top priority. And so when it comes to having these types of reforms, they are not on the front burner. However, we recognize as moving the economy forward that we have to address those issues, which is why we're glad there is a proposal to reform the pension and the state health benefits plan, which is why we believe that after the elections there will be a move to try to address the Transportation Trust Fund, and then we'll try to move this next issue forward. But there's only so many items that can be a top priority when it comes to straining the budget.
Sarah, I wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability, because that's evolving as a major issue, and typically you don't think of sort of businesses as being environmentally friendly, although we know that that's generally not the case. But sustainability has been a very important issue for us, and the importance of believing in it and understanding that it can make you operate more effectively and efficiently, and also save you money as you move forward. So if you could talk a little bit about why sustainability is important to us and why our members ought to be looking at sustainability issues as ways to move their businesses forward into the 21st century.
Sure, and actually I think most of our members are sustainable. And part of that comes out of 2008 and trying to look for cost savings, but also many of our companies are very good environmental stewards, and I think oftentimes it's just the case isn't necessarily told, and we don't tend to brag that often. But you know, you can think about simple things, again going back to turning off lights in your building or running your copier double-sided. A lot of that goes towards sustainable practices, and I think that it's become a little bit more mainstream in New Jersey over the years. But again, our NJ Pro affiliate has a sustainability for business primer, if you will, and it has within it both case studies, best practices, and examples that companies within New Jersey have done to look at people, planet, and profits, and how do you achieve that triple bottom line of sustainability. And we walk through things that can be done in a simple office environment through, you know, a Fortune 500. And many years ago, I think it was found more in the corporate environments, and then it started getting pushed down through the supply chain, and that our larger corporate members really were looking to help smaller members and helping members of their supply chain as well, so that we could compete globally, but also be able to use our resources wisely here at home. And so BIA has encouraged sustainability for many years and look to help our members with it. And again, if you're looking for ways to implement sustainability into your office, njprofoundation.org, and if you go under the reports, there's a sustainability for business, and it's got some great solutions in it that can help your office and to help transform you and hopefully also save you some money as well. And then I think also looking at other examples, if you're looking to benchmark what your company is doing in terms of energy usage, the US EPA, I think we're all familiar with Energy Star. You probably have an appliance that's Energy Star. Well, they also have Energy Star for buildings, and there are different industries which they've done benchmarking on, and it's a free service, and it's an easy way for you to see how your company stacks up against others in your industry. So that can also help you in some of your benchmarking.
Thank you, Sarah. Melanie, back on the issue of pension reform, simple question. You know, when you think about it, we had actually Tom Byrne presenting at one of our events ahead of the State Investment Council, and I thought, to me at least, he made a very persuasive case that there are not a lot of places to go with this issue. Either you commit to taking $3 and $4 billion out of the budget each and every year at the exclusion of other programs, or you do something else. And we seem to be stuck right now. So do you see a path forward for any of this stuff? Or is this debate going to be going on for the foreseeable future into next budget cycle?
I actually see the debate going on into the foreseeable future because this debate has been going on in the past. And that's because the whole issue of pension reform has actually been, and funding it has been kicked down the road by past governors, past legislatures, and we have not addressed what we need to do in order to be able to make this fundable. So as of this point, there are other states around the country that have attempted to address this, and New Jersey was looking at it with the bright minds that were brought around the table who made some excellent recommendations. However, in this political environment presently, which is an election for the Assembly and a forthcoming presidential election, I do not see this being resolved at this time.
I know it's quite a ways from the gubernatorial election. Without mentioning any names, without getting into specifics, are we seeing an impact even at this early date of the governor's race, which is now 2 years down? Well, it's going to start probably next year, but 2 years down the road, 2017, so it's 2 years. Are we seeing any impact of that on state policy and what you run into day to day, or is it still too early? And if you're seeing an impact, what are you seeing out there that sort of shows that people are looking ahead?
Elections happen in New Jersey every year. So every election impacts New Jersey politics. And we're one of the states that is so special because New Jersey and Virginia actually have our gubernatorial and legislative elections in what's called an off year. So as a result, that means that when the congressional or federal elections are happening, New Jersey is not having an election, although you might have it on the local level. But we have ours so that at the top of the ticket, this was by our forefathers, that you will not have at the top of the ticket a federal election that could then drive the rest of the ticket and influence it. So because New Jersey always likes to be special. And so as a result, every year we're going to have the politics impacting what the decisions are on legislation and impacting decisions of our governor. So are the candidates who are not yet announced but are certainly making the rounds around the state being influencing what's happening? Absolutely, that's influencing it. And so you need to stay on top of the politics to understand who's supporting whom or might support whom, to understand what legislation is being driven or not driven based on that internal party politics. And that is part of the fun of being a lobbyist, government affairs specialist, advocate for business in New Jersey, because we like to try to play the same guessing game that everyone plays with who's running, who's supporting whom, and who's going to be our next president, and will he or won't he, and or she, and so all of those questions that that we ask ourselves every day, and that appear in all of the political rags that we read, to be able to stay up on top of the inside news.
And we have time for one more question, and it's for you, Sarah, and it deals with infrastructure, because we have these debates and all we talk about is the Transportation Trust Fund, but there's other infrastructure out there which is probably in just as bad shape, and needs assistance, needs help, needs funding, sewer, water, and so forth, and doesn't seem to get the attention. So what do you foresee happening in that area? Is there room to make it a holistic discussion about all aspects of infrastructure at the same time we're talking about TTF, or is it simply going to be TTF and then let's worry about everything in the future? And then how do we deal with what will be, what are obvious problems in infrastructure as a whole?
Well, again, I think we've started having some of these conversations, but oftentimes they happen in silos. And again, going back to Superstorm Sandy, that exposed some vulnerabilities in our electric and gas systems and our telephone systems. But if you look at how technology has changed over the years, within some utilities it's stayed the same, and in others it's rapidly advanced. I'm not sure that I can say Bell would recognize the phone if I showed him my iPhone today, whereas Edison might still recognize his systems. But I think that we have been trying to bring to the table that holistic approach of, if we're going to be paving a road, let's also look at what pipes are underneath it, and how can we have a comprehensive plan? How can we be looking at asset management? How can we have best practices shared across our utilities, but also looking at our non-regulated utilities, because we have those that the Board of Public Utilities governs, and then we have ones that happen on the municipal level as well. And trying to have that coordination and those discussions so that we can minimize costs to ratepayers while still ensuring reliable, adequate, and affordable service, and allowing for technology to also be advancing so that we are at the cutting edge and be able to have innovation happen here as well. And I think that there's also some other areas too. We're looking at our infrastructure, having us have the ability to compete as well. And I think we have several different pipelines being proposed here. We are unfortunately at the end of our power grid, and so we don't necessarily have all of the power plants here either. So looking at some of the transmission lines, but looking at our water infrastructure as well, and looking at all these different components that do add into business, but then being able to also mitigate some of those costs. So if we're going to upgrade, then how do we do it in a responsible way so that we aren't increasing costs to ratepayers while also increasing the reliability? And we're really looking at that give and take right now, and how can we have that coordinated effort so that we can achieve some cost savings but also still have infrastructure to compete in the 21st century.
Well, we're coming up on the noontime hours, so that's pretty much all the time we have today. So unfortunately, and it's been a great discussion with both Melanie and Sarah, we have to bring today's webinar to a close. Don't forget, all of you will be receiving a recording of today's webinar via email, along with the PowerPoint presentation that you saw today. Lastly, we will be sending you a survey that we hope you'll fill out so we can understand how best to provide you important information in the future in a webinar format. Our next Live from the State Capitol webinar will take place on July 1st at 11 o'clock with Melanie and Andrew Musick as they deconstruct the FY16 budget, presumably after it's been signed by the governor prior to the constitutionally mandated deadline. So again, for Melanie Willoughby and Sarah Bloom, this is Peter Peretzman thanking you.